Hey everyone, today I want to talk about the Canon R3 camera, which was announced this week by Canon, and it sounds like an absolute belter. As an avid Canon user, I get quite excited, like we all do, when they announce a new camera, especially if that camera is going to be pretty useful when it comes to sports photography. This announcement from Canon was more of a tease than it was a full product reveal, but it is still really interesting, and the Canon R3 is going to pack some pretty mean features. While the announcement is really exciting and gives us a great little tease and insight into what the R3 will be, there was still no real meat on the bones. There was no price, no release date, and most of the specs were still left out at this stage. However, the few details that have been released at this early stage were pretty impressive. Now, the R3 will be a mirrorless camera, and therefore it is going to have an electric shutter. No news as of yet whether it will also have a mechanical shutter. There was a little hint in the Canon announcement page on the website that it may do, but for now that's not been confirmed. If you're not familiar with the difference between a mechanical shutter and an electric shutter, then a mechanical shutter is very much the old school shutter you'll be used to on most DSLR cameras. The likes of this ancient thing uses a mechanical shutter, as does my 1D Mark IV. A mechanical shutter uses a conventional front and rear shutter curtains, which are located in front of the sensor, and it's those that open and close to produce the exposure of your photograph. This shutter mechanism is noisy, it's generally got a lifespan, and it's always going to be limited when it comes to speed, although some of the more modern cameras have really pushed that quite far. Benefits of an electric shutter are, first and foremost, it is totally silent. There is no moving parts, therefore there is going to be no noise. Now, if you're a wildlife photographer, that is incredibly useful if you're shooting a bird or an animal that you've been maybe waiting 4 or 5 hours to shoot. The last thing you want is for that noisy shutter to start hammering down and scare the animal off. So, how the electric shutter mechanism works on a mirrorless camera is that the sensor is effectively turned on and off to control the exposure of the photograph. So, as I said, they are totally silent. They do not have a lifespan, which is pretty critical. So on the old 1D Mark IV, which I still use religiously and will until it gives up on me most likely, that has a shutter lifespan, I think, of around 500,000 actuations, which is pretty large, but it does kind of put an end on the lifespan of the camera, or certainly the lifespan of the shutter before you upgrade it. The other massive benefit about electric shutters is the speed, and we'll come back to that in a minute because that is a major selling point of this Canon R3. Now, the R3 is also going to have an RF lens mount. Now, if you're an avid Canon user, you'll know that there's the EFS lens, there's the EF lens. Well, the RF mount was originally developed specifically, or primarily I should say, for video. It offers superior image quality and a better sharpness. So based on that, and this camera having that RF lens mount, you probably assume that this camera is going to be geared towards film and video once again. Well, possibly not. As a sports photographer, the best thing about the R3, the thing that jumps out to me beyond everything else, is the speed of this thing. It's going to shoot image stills at a blazingly quick 30 frames per second. On my trusty Canon 1D Mark IV, this shoots at 10 frames per second. Pretty quick. Now, I've also used my 80D, which I'm recording this on, for sports photography, and that packs 7 frames per second. And it's more the focus speed that lets that down for sport rather than the frames per second. 7 frames per second is just about workable. 30 frames per second takes it to a different stratosphere altogether when we're talking about sports photography. And it's that speed that means that this Canon R3 is, at the moment, from what we know, shaping up to be the most powerful full frame camera body they have released for sports photographers. Another feature the R3 is going to have, which I'm absolutely fascinated by, is eye input AF. In other words, eye input autofocus. Now, Canon have tried something like this many years ago. I think it was in the late 90s. They had some similar technology, albeit a very old version of it. in one or two of the camera bodies then, had very limited success, and that's being kind. Essentially, how this should work is that when you're looking through the viewfinder, the camera will focus on whatever the photographer's eye is looking at, which is staggering. I would love to try that in a game of football, which I shoot most of, or soccer. I would love to try that out and just see the reality of how that would work, but certainly is an intriguing proposition at this point. Big question many sports photographers will be asking when they look at the specs for this and deciding whether to buy it or not is, will it be better than, will it supersede the Canon 1D Mark III? And that is pretty much the go-to camera for sports photographers. So it's impossible at this point to really draw a conclusion whether the R3 will overtake the 1D Mark III for sports photographers. Obviously the R3 is going to have that 30 frames per second, the 1D Mark III hit I think 20 frames per second. But moreover, there's some functionality the 1D had that is not yet announced for the R3 and maybe totally missing for all we know at this point from the R3. Three of them are the large battery, which lasts for hours on end. My 1D Mark IV, by the way, would still probably shoot for 10 hours or something. It's an incredible battery life. So that's a massive thing that the R3 will have to have. There's also a significant image buffer on the 1D Mark III. That is going to be really important. And lastly, connectivity. The 1D Mark III has an Ethernet port and has quite a few connectivity options. The R3 is going to have those same types of connectivity options for photographers as the nearly said predecessor. As a 1D Mark III, obviously this isn't a direct predecessor to that camera. It's a different line, but it could overtake it. That said, one of the other things that I love about the R3 is the look of it. If you look on the Canon website and all the kind of the lovely imagery that has come out about it, you'll see the grip. I'm going to hold the old 1D Mark IV and you'll see the grip is, it's fine. It's dated, but it's fine. The new R3, the shape is now bigger and mimics the kind of range of 1Ds, but the grip itself looks beautiful. It might only be a rubber grip, but it looks absolutely beautiful. The camera itself looks phenomenal. As I said, there is no release date known yet for the Canon R3. I'd probably guess we're looking towards autumn, winter now. If it was going to be out before, say, late summer, you'd probably expect to have some more specs right now. There's a couple of massive sporting events coming up this summer, the European Football Championships, and also obviously the Olympic Games, which happen in Tokyo, I think in August time. Those two events, I reckon, keep an eagle eye out for, because there is likely to be Canon photographers or Canon testers, ambassadors on Canon's behalf, testing out the R3 in a real world scenario to kind of get a feel for it and give all the demonstration shots and whatever else they'd usually get. Now, it probably will be heavily disguised. We might not be able to tell it if we did see it, but it's certainly something to keep an eye out for. I vaguely remember years ago, one of the 1Ds was kind of half identified at a World Cup or something like that as being used. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on. The other big announcement that went with this from Canon is lenses. Now, if you're a sports photographer, you are probably going to be shooting on a 70-200 2.8 lens, of which has been an EF mount version of that for many years. There is also a RF version of that lens released in the last year or so, I think. But you're also going to want a super telephoto, so your big 400mm 2.8. A lot of photographers now going with the 600 f4 lenses. And until now, there hasn't been one of those in the RF mount. Now, another hint that the R3 is definitely going to be a massive contender for professional sports photographers to use is that Canon have also announced this week that the 400 2.8 and the 600 f4, the beautiful latest lightweight versions, they are coming to the RF mount. And while we don't have a release date for them and they're not available to pre-order yet by the look of it, they will be coming, and I will imagine will drop around the same time as the R3, which makes a prospect of having them incredible. Can you imagine the setup of having a couple of R3s, a 70-200mm lens and a 400mm lens, shooting footy or shooting whatever sport it is you're into? It will be incredible. However, like many, I won't have the budget to buy even one of the R3s anytime soon. I wouldn't have thought. I'll be shooting on this for a good few months yet, maybe a year, until I can afford to upgrade. And that is the other great benefit when Canon do release a camera that is potentially as groundbreaking as the R3 is going to be. And that is for all of us guys who can't afford to go and get the top equipment and rely on the older used stuff. A release like this will almost certainly, gradually at least, push all the prices of previous models down. So perhaps not so much the 1D Mark III, although to a point there will be. Certainly the 1D Mark IIs and the original 1DX. You're going to see those prices continue to drop, and there's already some great prices on the 1DX and 1DX Mark II. If you're buying used, see what will probably happen. The top guys, if they decide, if the R3 becomes a new go-to, they'll all go and buy this, and they'll go trade in the Mark IIIs and the Mark IIs and the 1DX line into camera stores. If you're in the UK, keep an eye on MPB, keep an eye on Wex, on Park, on LCE in the US, at Arama, places like that. Keep an eye on the used pages, because when they upgrade to the R3, these photographers with the big budgets, what they're going to do is they're going to part X their old gear, and that becomes available as used on these big camera store websites. Obviously eBay exists, but the benefit of buying from the camera stores online is you will still, even though they're used, get some sort of warranty, whether it's 3 months, 6 months or a year. So that is a benefit for all of us who live in perhaps a bit more of the real world, that we can still hopefully access a bargain on the back of this R3 coming out. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. I've not done anything like this before. I do want to do some more. Again, it's a little bit echoey in here, so I do apologise for the sound quality. I am taking steps as I grow my channel to hopefully get somewhere a little bit better to shoot as time goes on. I'll keep an eye on the latest announcements on the R3 and the RF mount lenses that are coming out as well. And I'll update with another video in due course when we have more information. Thanks for watching.